Hello. It has been a school year to just be in the books this year. So I am thankful that this year is done. My name is Michelle, and I'm here to talk to you today about Hearts for Him Through Time, Resurrection to Reformation. And I just finished this up with my son this week. So it's fresh and exciting, but also it was a jump through time. We had a lot to cover, and so hopefully today I can walk you through some of the details in this manual. So again, this is a great manual. First of all, it's some really deep times in history. So one of the things I want to just first of all say is that Carrie, the author of this book or of this program, did her research and looked in different places to combine enough sources that would work together to create something pretty amazing. So I first want to say that. The second thing I want to say is that I think my son, who this year did this program as a fifth grader, was probably a little too young. He was capable of doing all of the readings and having great discussions on the history. He was capable of doing all the work, which I will show you. But there were some areas where I think if I had waited till he was in sixth grade, that maybe we could have had a deeper level of discussion, or even some of the work might have been not as challenging. So I will say to you, if you're looking at this program for your child, sixth grade would be a great time to start if they're on the upper end. And my son did this in fifth grade and did well, but I think that if had I waited, he probably would have done even better. So that's just my 2 cents. So just so you can see this book, it is beautiful, first of all, so that's what I love. I also love the way that she organizes it. And this is one of the reasons that Heart of Dakota wins for me every single time. Because when I open up the book, she, at the beginning, will walk you through some of the things that you're going to need. So she's going to tell you, okay, for this category, you're going to need this, and for this category, you're going to need that, which helps you when you're trying to buy your supplies and get yourself organized before the year starts. And with every Heart of Dakota program, there are Facebook groups that go along with it. Those are great resources to go to find extra things. So for example, let's say your child loves science projects, and then there will probably be a paper file that you can print off that will help you organize your science projects. Or maybe your child needs extra visuals because they don't do as much with verbal. There are plenty of moms out there who have made files that you can download off of the Facebook site, print them off for your own use, and then create them for your child. So that's one resource I wanted to point out there, that it's really important to think about what your child needs. So when you open up the book, and this is true of every one of theirs, is that they are organized into sections. So every day you do this, you are going to be looking at 2 pages. The first is going to be what I call the main part of it. It's the history of it. So your entire day or week will be organized around a history time period. And you can see here, I picked a day 4. Let me do a day 1. So this one says, and the focus for the week is early church councils and creeds. So in your actual thing, it'll tell you what you are reading about as history. Notice too these little letters. In the other books, there was probably a lot more teacher involvement, but this is the first one where there's a lot of student independence, and my student was able to do most of this independently. So as you see the boxes, I'll make sure to tell you what we did. So you've got your reading about history, your story time. Both of these were ones my child was able to do independently. You have research, which you're going to need to have some way for your child to do research, and history project. Now the projects, I would say, are ones where your child will need some help, because there are going to be supplies that they need. There's going to be instructions that maybe are a little trickier to follow. And maybe there's even some cooking, which they're going to need your help in the kitchen. So history project might need some help. However, if you have a very independent student who's capable of a lot of things, maybe they can do that on their own. This independent history study is also another one that they will do on their own. And then over on this side is where you're going to get your, this is more like your 3 R's. This is where they're going to fill in the history and the English and the stories with some of the other meat. So this one here, Bible Quiet Time, is one that they will do on their own, which is great. They're starting to get a practice and a habit of learning how to read the Bible and to start studying it a little bit. So when I talk about that section later, I'll show you some of the resources that they use for that. Now, this is the box that is going to rotate each day, and most of the time they're doing this one with you. So this is a special box, I would call it, because there's a love-hate relationship sometimes. Sometimes you're doing a resource with them that is beautiful and wonderful, and you're like, oh, this is amazing. And other times it may be a category that you don't feel as comfortable with, and so you have to kind of plow through. So this is one where, as we rotate through, you'll have to decide for yourself what works the best. Just to kind of give you a heads up for the way this is set up, it's 4 days in a week. So the first day is usually an art thing, and I'll show you the book later. So there's 1 day of art, and then there's going to be 2 days where you and your child, if it's a boy or girl, you're going to get a chance to have a devotional with them. And this has been one of the most exciting things I've gotten to do with my son this year, was getting to talk about manhood. And so there were some awkward and interesting conversations that we had, but this day was great, and I'll show you those resources later. And then the third day is usually you're going to be looking in the Bible and reading the Bible with them, and it may relate to the topic you talked about the day before in the devotional, and it's kind of a way to just say, okay, now what does the Bible say about that? So this was a great one as well. Now the fourth day, I will be the first to say that this was not my favorite day, but it's not because I don't like poetry. You're going to get a chance to look at poetry, which is always in the back of the book. My problem with the poetry this year is that it was Emily Dickinson. Now, I'm not trying to say I don't like Emily Dickinson, but I remember reading her in high school and having to analyze it, and she has very, what is the word? She kind of has a lot of very poetic things. And so if you are kind of a dreamer and you love imagery, you're going to love Emily Dickinson. But for my very practical, rational son, we would just read it, and that was kind of all we did. We kind of read it, talked about it for a few seconds, and that was it. So just understand that if your child is not a super big poet, this may be a section that goes pretty quickly for you. Then there is, whoops, I lost my page. There also is going to be your language arts section, and this is going to include dictation, grammar, writing book information, and drawn into the Heart of Reading information. So that's all going to be in that language arts box. Now math, can't wait to talk to you about the math one, but math, you get to choose what you do. Okay, so that's the good news, you get to choose. And then for science, every day mostly is going to be independent. Day 1, 2, and 3, they will be alternating between reading a book about science and also doing some notebooking. So there'll be notebooking, and then on day 4, they're going to have a science experiment. So these science experiments are maybe ones that your kids can do all by themselves, or if you have one that likes to be held by the hand, they're going to need a little bit of help at times with getting supplies and getting some of the understanding of it, because some of the topics were a little bit tough for my son to grasp and to understand. So that's one section that you may need to give them some help. Now, before I go into the actual books, which is my favorite part, I do want to show you some of the supplies that I needed to get this year to be a success. So the one thing that they're going to give you is this student notebook. Now, I put it in an actual notebook. You're only going to get them as the paper form. So you're going to get them in the paper form. And unfortunately, I wish I could have done this differently. If I could have chosen, I probably would have gone to a place and got a binder and bound the pieces together in a spiral bound, because these get a little flimsy, and as you can see, they kind of come off. So that's one a little bit odd thing. But as you can see, if I can give you a couple pages that aren't broken, they do beautiful things. Now, again, forgive the handwriting, but they're always going to have, if I can make it on there. Okay, the very top, they're going to have a timeline where they're going to be filling out information of the history they read that week. In the middle, they're going to be imagining like they're writing a postcard to a friend about a place that they're researching. So throughout the year, there's going to be different places that are important to the history. And so the research is going to be researching a city or a place where that took place. So for example, one of the ones at the end of the school year, we studied Philadelphia. So he was pretending like he was in Philadelphia. Now, the bad news is that if you notice the box, it's relatively small. So if you have a child with big handwriting, this is going to be a challenge. And this is one reason why if I had maybe waited one more year, my son might have written a little bit smaller. But sometimes what he would do is he would think, oh, I don't have to write all the sentences as long as I fill in the box. So that became kind of a struggle where I said, these are the certain questions you're supposed to answer, but he had a struggle getting them fitting them in the box. So that's the thing to think about for your child. If maybe they need some lined notebooks where they write it in the notebook and then paste it into this section, that might work as well. There always is a written narration section, if I can get that to work. The bad news about this as well with my son was that he often saw the directions which said 8 to 12 sentences, and he would make sentences like, in this case, Gutenberg is cool. Well, that's not the greatest sentence of all, but the goal of the written narration is that after they've read a history reading, that they're going to be writing about it. So I guess at this point, we want to celebrate their writing. However, if you have a child who often says things like Gutenberg is cool, you might want to suggest that they write again on lined paper or white paper and then paste it in here after they've edited it themselves. Because once it's in here, you really can't edit it very well. And that was one of the things that I struggled with was, okay, you did it, but maybe we could have added more or stuff like that. So that's one thing for you to think about as you're going through. And then they're also going to be doing a person box, like one of the people that they study about. They're going to fill in information. Again, as you can see, my son did the most minimal work he could there, and we struggled with spelling in times. Like he had to spell the word Renaissance. That is not an easy word to spell. So for him to have to spell that a couple of times was hard. Then there also was a person you would just label. So this was Joan of Arc week. So we just labeled her, and then on the map found the place where they were from. So in this case, we have Orléans, France. So we wrote that on there. Also, there would be lots of great pictures in here, and often we would use those pictures to help us with history projects. So in this case, we looked at the pennants of the various kings, knights, whoever was in battle, and then the history project was that they got to make their own pennant based on directions. So that was kind of a cool thing. Every so often, I won't use this as my example. I can find another one. But every so often they also got to do some drawings, and that was a neat way to do some things. So this was my son's. He protested because he didn't want to do the directions that were in the draw and write book. He said, I want to do my own. Well, these little tiny legs may not be able to hold up a man in that armor, but oh well, that works. So every so often you're going to have a drawing. And one of the things, because you're studying one of the most amazing times in art history with the Renaissance, there's often going to be times where you're looking at art. So there may be a page where it's just art, and you're writing down the titles of the art. There is in the book, we talked about the art appreciation section. The notebook itself in the back, if I can get to it, has an art section. They call it the art gallery. So every so often in your instructions, it'll say turn to the art gallery, unit number, and then it'll give you a piece of art to look at and study. Now this is pretty good quality. Every so often my son would go, that's a little pixelated, but it's all good. So you would look at it, and then your art discussions would be based around those pictures that you're looking at. So that is all in this student notebook. Now for some of you, which I will get to, I'll give you my full thoughts later. Some of you are going to want to add in the optional Shakespeare section. I studied Shakespeare in high school, and I didn't know if I wanted to do this at a 5th grade level. I thought, I don't know. So I tried it so that I could at least be able to tell you, and I will show you this picture. Oh, sorry. So you're going to get a Shakespeare student notebook. I put this all in together. Now here's where I want to show you. This is what my son did to Shakespeare's picture, because I think he discovered that he was just not disgusted by Shakespeare, but just kind of bored with Shakespeare. So what often happened in the Shakespeare section is you'd have to color. My son does not like to color. He never has, even since he was like 2 or 3. I used to give him a coloring page and he'd draw lines on it. So he hasn't really improved much, but at least he's sort of in the lines. But then they also would have to write a quote from Shakespeare. So this is an optional part of it. And again, if you're doing this with a 5th grader, you might need to think to yourself, I don't know if they're ready for this, but maybe sixth graders would be. Again, I don't know girls to boys either. It just really depends on your passion about Shakespeare and also about your child. If they love things like plays and they like to think about sometimes romantic stories and adventures, that'll be up to you to decide for your child. Okay, last thing, well, not last, but one thing I did is I purchased a notebook like this, and this was the binder for myself to stay organized. What I do in ones like this is this is where I keep things like printables that I might need for the year, and then for me, I keep my attendance in here. So this is where I write down what they're doing each day, what the date is, and also how much time it takes. I'm just not really into computers much, which is why I do it written, but that's just my thing. Then I have a section where I put all of their maps. There's a lot of geography this year. I'll show you later. You get a little disc that you'll be printing things out. So if you really want to get organized for this year, you're going to want to print out as many of the maps as possible. There is in the Facebook files a page like this. This tells you all of the pages off of the disc that you will need to print out to use for the school year. So this is one way you can organize yourself pretty quickly if you want to get this done ahead of time. I did not, so I was finding myself the day before trying to make sure I have a printer that worked with paper, and sometimes that was a little bit hard to do. But there, you're going to be printing off maps that look like this, that are a whole map, and then the activity they'll have is that they'll have to label the maps themselves, and often there'll be some colors involved as well. So having these printed off ahead of time is going to save you a lot of time. Again, I forgot to do that, but it is what it is. Also in this notebook, I put things I found this resource one time on Facebook and then I couldn't find it again, but it was a page like this. Sorry again about the handwriting, but what it was is as they read their stories this year, they're going to focus on a different skill each day. So maybe one day in story time, they're going to read and retell it to you. So that's just out loud. The next day, they may look at a mood. So their job that day will be to write down some moods that they found in the book. Another day, they might talk about a great line that they found in the story that they thought was really great. Life lessons. And then I think the other two were plot twists. Yeah, so plot twists, and there was one more. Oh, and then new vocabulary words. So that's a paper I found that worked out. Once I couldn't find it anymore, I simply just had him change to oral and he would tell me the things that he was looking for. This notebook is also great because they will be working on some writing this year. And so I was able to, when he printed them off, just put them in here with all of the other papers that they got together. So this section, I don't know if I can show this or not, but it's relatively thick. All the papers that between the writing, the rough drafts, the geography, and the story time, this section got to be pretty big. And so having a place to organize that will actually be very helpful. So that's going to be a section. And then my last section I put in here was all the papers from Drawn into the Heart of Reading. Now I have made a video about Drawn into the Heart of Reading, so I won't go into super details. However, I print off some of my sections, so that means I've got, and if I'm doing a project or something, I try to put it all together before the unit starts, including the paper that says the pages they have to read and all that. So this section got pretty big for me as well. So again, that's a way you can help yourself stay organized, but also keep your sanity, because you're otherwise going to have a lot of papers that they're going to need. Also, be smart and get a big binder, because I was struggling a couple times. My things would get stuck and I couldn't get them out. So sorry about that. Last thing you may need in terms of a supply are some books like this. These are really helpful for when you have grammar assignments, or maybe even science notebooking if they like to have lined paper, or when they write down poetry or different quotes and things like that. This was his grammar section. I did it like this because I have 4 sons, and so they're all going to be using the grammar, so I don't want them writing in the book. So this is their way of saving that. So a grammar notebook is a great thing. I have a dictation notebook. He's had this same dictation notebook since he was in 2nd grade. So we've got stuff like this, and then all the way up to this year where he was writing a lot more. So a dictation notebook at any level is going to be really good. One other thing that you will need, or again, it depends on how you want to do it, is I have a science notebook as well. Now this one actually started maybe even in his last year, I don't remember. But what's cool about a big one like this is that you can fit a lot of information. So if you have a child who writes big, you're going to want a big notebook. So during the school year for this year, what he was doing, well, he had a lot, and I'll show you the science books later. He would do notebooking pages. Again, you can choose to make them use colors or not. And then he would have vocabulary sections where you'd write down a vocabulary word. Often there was a writing involved on those vocabulary days. And there also are experiments. So this is a really weird experiment day that he did, but this is where he would write down his, his hypothesis and his conclusion and all that kind of stuff. So some days he completely surprised me. Like this day, he decided to type up his written narration about the International Space Station. And then sometimes though he would write it. But either way, science was an area this year where I think he enjoyed it, and that was something that really helped out a lot. So those are the materials that you are going to need to start Resurrection to Reformation. And then let me get you some of the books. Okay, so here are some of the books you're going to need. This is the disc that will help you with your geography. It will come, I think it comes with, no, it's one of the resources that you will need. You'll also get this World History Atlas. I do think this is one that you might be using in later years too. So this is a good resource to have. This is one that they're just going to refer to, so you don't have to print anything from this. It's just maps that they will use to look at. This is so interesting about this book. This is actually one of the science books that they will be starting with. And I wanted to put this out here to show you because this is to show you that they're going to be looking at Earth, physical science, space, all the different things related to space, Earth, and that kind of stuff. So this is one of the books they'll be using. This was an interesting book. I sometimes don't like these books, but this one actually turned out okay. It was a good explanation of some of the things within space and Earth and that kind of stuff. It wasn't my son's favorite, but he did at least read that one. I think, don't get me wrong, this might be one of the science or might be a story time one, but either way, you're reading about Galileo. This one was my son's favorite, was the Astronomy book. It had, just basic information you're going to need to know about the planets, about stars, about Earth itself, etc. So that was a good one. And then this is the one he finished with, and this same thing, just looking at different parts about Earth, but also history within the Earth as well. So people that explored the Earth. So those are some of the science resources you're going to be using this year. And as you can see, some of them are kind of big, so you'll be in them for a while. But if they enjoy science, they'll most likely enjoy that. Now, history, we had a whole bunch of resources for that. So I want to show you a couple. In the beginning, you are starting out in the Middle Ages for a while. So some of these stories, just like the Middle Ages, or maybe feel a little bit old. So just be aware of that if you have a younger reader, they may struggle with it a little bit, and you may want to just sit with them and make sure that they can process it, because some of the words are a little bit older in this one. You also will be going through these two books, which are phenomenal in terms of the history of some of the early church. And what I like about this is it tells actual stories of people in the church, but it tells them in the way of a story. Again, same thing with these, that if you have a student who loves to read themselves and can think on their own, then they can probably do this all by themselves. And they're supposed to do these sections themselves. However, if you have a student who struggles a little bit with reading lots of words and then understanding them, you may want to sit with them and read it to them, because they're very rich in information, but often the student is having to read a lot. One of the other sources you're going to be getting is this, which is a history read aloud by Diana Waring, the famous, as I've been told. I think I met her one time, actually. So this is great. This gives them a chance to listen to her read and talk about history. So I don't know if you can see, anyways, you can see some of the topics on there as well. Now this was my absolute favorite. If I could have done it all over again, I might have stuck with just this text. This text is rich, so rich, but I like the fact that what she does, this author, is that she doesn't hide behind just the facts. She states them, but before she does, she says, okay, this is going to be messy, and I'm going to leave it for you to decide what you think about it. So there is a section on slavery in this, and she says ahead of time, like, look, this was a very awful time in our nation's history. Let me tell you how it got started. And she talks about some of the economic reasons for slavery, some of the actual the routes of it, but not in a way that's just like fact-based, but it's like you're in the story. So I think it's important to get a chance to read this book for sure. And also what was neat about this book is there's stuff about all over the world. So you're going to read about emperors in China. You're going to get to read about stories within Africa, India. I think there's some South America as well. It's been a while. So anyways, there's a lot of information in this. This is great. I read this just for fun because I learned so much. But the one thing about this that you need to know is that, again, if you have a sensitive reader, there are occasionally times where either the author, Carrie, or the author of this will say, okay, for sensitive students, skip this section. Now, my son, he read through everything because he just thought it was fascinating. But your child, know your child differently. And again, you may want to pre-read before they do so that you know this is what they will be reading. So those are the history and science texts that they will be reading as they go in. So for some of the extra resources that you will be using this year, there are going to be some for the different boxes. And this is one that you'll be using in your independent history box. It is one that they've been using different types of this book for the last couple of years. So it's the typical show you how to draw, and then there'll be some coloring and also some writing here and there as well. So this was fun. If you have an artist, they will really like this book. And one book, which again, as an adult, I think I really would like this, but as a 5th grader, this was hard. It doesn't use typical old Shakespeare language, but it's going to have a lot of stuff, including, for some of you need to understand that there is going to be some witchcraft in there. There may be some sorcery. And for my son, he would like to tell you that there's a lot of love stories, and he didn't like that. So just be aware of that. And if I had to choose again, I probably would not do the book at all. I probably would wait and do this at an older age. But one thing I did find, this might be cheating, but I would go to YouTube and I would find like Othello for kids. And I'd find like a cartoon summary of Othello. Because my goal is right now to get a foundation of who Shakespeare is and what writings he had. But I don't really want to worry about analyzing or thinking through it too much, just kind of give a baseline. So in the end, I ended up skipping the book and instead just having them watch a small video about the play and then doing the activity in the Shakespeare notebook, which was coloring and then writing a quote. So that's my suggestion if you have a person who isn't quite ready for some of the heavy details of the very dramatic plays that he has. Okay, I'm going to show these ones quickly. These are some of the story time stories that they will be reading on their own and doing some of those like vocabulary activities with. So this one about Blaise Pascal. This one is a great book about Mary Bunyan. This is an audiobook they will be listening to, and I think he really liked this one. This was a book I think I cried. Yeah, I think I cried in this one. I actually did read this out loud to him. This is this is one of the history stories that they had to read, Sir Walter Raleigh. This was a one about John Wycliffe. It was actually pretty good. Now this is a book about Shakespeare, so it's one of those that has pictures and things like that in it. So this one was a more of an easy read. My son loved this book, Illustrated Book of Knights. It has a lot of pictures, but also, you know, what kid doesn't like learning about knights? It was pretty interesting. Another one about the Middle Ages. Now, I think it says famous men, but there were a couple women in here, so don't get offended by that. But you want to know that in this book, again, like most Middle Ages, there is some violence, and there is a lot of writing and reading too, so just be aware of that. Now, these two books are what I would call a little bit more old-fashioned. My son had a harder time with both of these. Not that they were impossible. Like this one he liked this one better. I think this one though was a little bit harder for him to understand. He wasn't quite as ready for this one. This was an excellent book about Johann Gutenberg, and again in a story style. We're back to visiting Mr. Pipes again, and this year they're going to get to look more about the hymns during the Reformation. Of course, you can't get through all this without learning about Queen Bess. and Leonardo da Vinci. Again, all these are great resources. So those are a lot of the stories that you're going to be reading in story time or independent history study to understand the history deeper. And again, most of them are ones that they're going to really enjoy. Now for the Bible, we're going to be looking at Philippians. This was a great study. He was able to do this all on his own. I'm not saying all of them were perfect. A couple of them, like this page, he might have given up on because he had to write. And heaven forbid, you might have to write a long time. That's one thing he pushes me on a lot. So there's a lot of study on Philippians. They'll be reading it a lot, and they will also be diving into it. One other thing that we did was the box that has the rotating things. And so one of the days you're going to be doing art. So this is the art book. Almost all of the art in here is very decent, and some really interesting information about how they made the art. Every so often there'll be one where Carrie will write in her notes, she'll say nudity. Please know, if anything, it's just a little bit, and it's more on the foggy side. It's not nothing, something that they're gonna just jump to and say, oh, look at that. It's gonna be subtle, so just know that. Throughout, for my son, this was the book that he read. There's I don't know if there's a girl version of this or it's just a different girl book that they read, but for this, and this was an amazing book. I've actually read this to my son twice because it's that good. But this man goes through different topics in each chapter about things that are important for manhood. And then these books, these were the ones that were a little bit difficult to get to because honestly, I had never really talked to my son about these topics before. So this was just one we just had to plow through. But we had some great conversations, good prayers, and learned a couple of things too. So it was worth it, I think, in the end for them to get to see. Okay, so I'm gonna fly through the Drawn into the Heart of Reading books because I've already talked about how to format that in another video. But these were excellent books this year. I think I cried or had fun reading them myself before the year started, and then he read them. I will say this is one book I actually allowed my son to read on his own because I made one change. And for this year, I added in my own choice of a book. I wanted my son to get a chance to see a little bit of something different, especially considering all that we went through last year. So I took out this book and said, hey, if you want to read this on your own, go ahead. And we really did this, and my son loved this book. He thought it was really, he learned a lot, and that was important. Another book, this is one of my favorites. Oh my goodness, this is kind of like a Pilgrim's Progress style book. It's great. Of course, Paddington. Who doesn't love Paddington? Black Gold. Oh my gosh, this is a tearjerker. This is a tearjerker. Typical horse story where, I won't spoil the ending, but another great book. Again, so I think these were, I don't know which ones they were. Anyways, so those are the books they'll be reading and Drawn into the Heart of Reading. Now, this is one of the areas where I had an interesting thing happen. So all along, since kindergarten on, I have been using Singapore. Loved it. Easy, fun. But this year, my husband and I were doing so much of the math with him that we were taking 45 minutes to an hour sometimes just to do problems. And this was my husband, who is an engineer who loves math. So some of the math that we were starting to get into was starting to get so long and so hard. And some of these pages, there was a lot of exercises to do. And if you look at even just the format, it's not very visually nice. So a lot of this is stuff that isn't too bad. However, there was a lot. And then as we got further on, it was like, oh my gosh, there's just a lot of information. So do I still like Singapore through fifth grade? Through fifth grade, I would say yes, I've loved it. This is the first year though where I was like, so midway through the year, I changed over to teaching textbooks, which was a life changer for me because number one, there's an instructor who teaches it to you. So that allowed my son to have an instructor, like a computer program to do it. Now, I'm not normally a big computer person. However, this was huge with 3 younger sons who also need mom's attention. For me to be taking 45 minutes to an hour to do math, and then he needs dad's attention to do it too, that was a lot. And so now he's able to do a smaller lesson with an instructor, and then if he makes a mistake right there, it corrects him and he has to correct it. The problem I was having with this is maybe he had gotten the problems, but I didn't get to see him until afterwards. And so what would happen is, look at this. We would have to go correct it on the spot, and I often have to write it with him because it was starting to become really hard. Not that math shouldn't be hard. It's just that the timing that you need to put into it was a lot. So my suggestion is, if you haven't already seen or checked out Teaching Textbooks, it's a really great program, especially if you have multiple kids. I feel no guilt for doing it, and I'm probably going to end up doing it with my rest of my children at some point soon too. So that's my suggestion on math, but again, it's up to you if you have your own math program you love. The one thing that was a little on the complicated side is this. And I say complicated because at first there were some issues with the page numbers, and I ended up having to call, and I realized I had an old manual, and so I had to get that switched. This is one that you're either going to love or hate. Now, if you yourself were great at languages and writing, you can be good at tweaking things that you need to. So just understand that you as a teacher can look through the instructions and make it work for your child. So when the instructions are saying, so you would learn a certain writing skill, but then at the end, there'd be a checklist like this. Unfortunately for my child, he wasn't always going to do every single one of those skills, because for him, I wanted him to understand, what is a paragraph? Let's make a good paragraph. Let's write a 3-paragraph paper. Let's write a 5-paragraph, which you did get to do 1 5-paragraph. But the understanding of every single detail that they needed, like having a who clause in every paragraph, that's great, but they don't have to have that. So I think what you need to do, if you're choosing their writing program, there's nothing wrong with it, but do understand it is a little bit weighty, and you will probably need to do it with your child at least for the first few months, because you're going to be making these outlines. Let me see, I don't have an example of their outline, but you're going to read a text, and then what's going to happen is you're going to take from the text and make a keyword outline. Now, this isn't meant to say like, oh, that was Justinian the Great. So Justinian was amazing. You're going to actually write keywords and symbols instead. So it's a little bit different. I think it's like a shorthand way of taking information, putting shorthand notes here, then going from the shorthand notes into a paragraph. So this took a little bit of time, and sometimes it could have taken up to 45 minutes each day with me full on attention with this. So if you have a really busy family, or maybe you yourself don't feel as confident in teaching the writing skills, you may want something else. You may not. I don't know, but that's up to you. So these are all of the amazing things of Resurrection to Reformation. I'm sorry this video is so long. However, there is a lot of information, a lot of materials, and a lot of things that you will need to consider as you go into this year. Again, if I were to do it again, I probably would have paused and done a different thing for 5th grade for him and done this for 6th grade. However, your child is different and wonderful, and you need to do what's best for them. So, hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, great. Hopefully I'll have some more videos at some point, because I'm going to do something a little bit different for next year in order to get him ready for 6th grade. So hope you're having a great day, and I will hopefully see